since 1928, until he dared to criticize the chairman's great leap forward, was dragged out and publicly vilified. To his Red Guard accusers, Peng was a three antes element: wasteful, corrupt and bureaucratic, disloyal to Chairman Mao. Jiang Wen-tian, Mao's predecessor as party leader in the 1930s, was damned alongside him. Both men had devoted their lives to the Chinese Revolution. Now, they have no rights. That summer, Red Guards converged on the walled park of Zhongnan High, where Liu Shaoqi had his official residence. For weeks, they kept up a loudspeaker barrage, until finally Liu was forced to come out and confront his accusers. His public humiliation was accompanied by an inquisition of tens of thousands of his former associates. Liu himself was expelled from the party forever, and he and his wife placed under arrest.
Anyone who had ever been in contact with them, for example, people who had helped my mother to join the Chinese Communist Party, were kept permanently handcuffed in prison. For years, in order to eat, they had to bend down to their food, as if eating from a trough.
The Red Guards, having served their purpose, were then packed off to work in the countryside, pledging loyalty as they went. Despite the brave words, for most it was a rude awakening.
When Mao Zedong forced every student to go to the rural areas, we all saw that the lives of the millions of peasants were extremely pitiful. They lived in terrible conditions. We began to doubt the superiority of socialism. In the end, we became thoroughly disillusioned.
6 months later, Mao was at last able to convene a party congress, the first for 11 years, to declare that the Cultural Revolution had been brought to a successful close. In the new party constitution, Mao named Lin Biao his closest comrade in arms, an accolade the chairman had never before accorded to any of his colleagues. The army, which had emerged from the Cultural Revolution as the country's leading political force, was rewarded with key positions. Even Lin Biao was caught up in the mood, savouring his triumph. Mao's closing address, his last known speech in public, reflected his satisfaction on the way events had turned out.
我们的大会，这一次第9次代表大会能够开得好，能够开展一个团结的大会，胜利的大会。在这一块，取得更大的胜利。
In 1969, Mao was at the summit of his power, revered by radicals abroad. At home, he was adulated, and all those who dared doubt him had been cast into outer darkness. Yet his victory was hollow, and deep down, perhaps he knew it. He had indeed smashed the old world, but what did he have to put in its place?
Mao's original aim was to get rid of those people in power who wanted to follow the capitalist road. But what in fact happened, which no one had anticipated, was that a lot of people started to think for themselves and wonder whether the Communist Party wasn't making a mess of things.
By 1969, however, the Cultural Revolution was running out of steam. The spontaneity had gone. Even Mao seemed bored. The leftist values he'd advocated were now imprinted on the daily lives of almost 1 billion people. The only culture was Jiang Qing's model operas. Writers and artists were silenced or reduced to producing propaganda to glorify the regime. China had become so stultified, so shackled by Maoist orthodoxy, that it had become inevitable that one day the pendulum would swing back.
At that time in China, there were maybe 800 million or 1 billion people. And the minds of those 800 million or 1 billion persons were all the same as one mind. The mind of Mao Zedong. But after the Cultural Revolution, each individual had a mind of his own and was able to consider problems independently. This is the greatest gain from the Cultural Revolution. No more blind worship to anyone. No more long live, long live.
With hindsight, that was indeed the legacy of the Cultural Revolution, though it wouldn't become fully apparent until after Mao had died. In the meantime, the Chinese people would continue to go through the motions of belonging to an ultra-radical society in which fewer and fewer of them believed. The learning experience would eventually stand China in good stead, but it came at a high price. Liu Shaoqi died in an improvised prison in a distant provincial capital after being denied medical care. On his death certificate were the words, "Profession unknown." Many others paid with their lives, men who'd been at Mao's side for decades and those who were nameless. In all, 1 million people were killed during those years. In the late 1960s, as China was embroiled in the Cultural Revolution, skirmishes broke out along its border with the Soviet Union. The Russians began asking themselves whether the two countries were headed for war. The tension convinced America that it had much to gain by cooperating with the Chinese against their common enemy in Moscow. On February the 21st, 1972, the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, arrived in Beijing for a visit that would shift the global balance of power.